Well, welcome to Holy Trinity and St Saviour's Sermons. Here we seek to live life to the full, and I hope this sermon inspires you to do exactly that.
So the reading this morning comes from 2 Samuel chapter 1, and I'll be reading various verses from it. After the death of Saul, David returned from defeating the Amalekites and stayed in Ziklag 2 days. On the third day, a man arrived from Saul's camp with his clothes torn and with dust on his head. When he came to David, he fell to the ground to pay him honor. "What happened?" David asked. "Tell me." He said, "The men fled from the battle. Many of them fell and died, and Saul and his son Jonathan are dead." Then David and all the men with him took hold of their clothes and tore them. They mourned and wept and fasted till evening for Saul and his son Jonathan, and for the army of the Lord and the house of Israel, because they had fallen by the sword. David's lament for Saul and Jonathan. David took up his lament concerning Saul and his son Jonathan, and ordered that the men of Judah be taught this lament of the bow. It is written in the book of Joshua. "Your glory, O Israel, lies slain on your heights. How the mighty have fallen. Tell it not in Gath. Proclaim it not in the streets of Ashkelon, lest the daughters of the Philistines be glad, lest the daughters of the uncircumcised rejoice. O mountains of Gilboa, may you have neither dew nor rain, nor fields that yield offerings of grain. For there the shield of the mighty was defiled, the shield of Saul, no longer rubbed with oil. From the blood of the slain, from the flesh of the mighty, the bow of Jonathan did not turn back. The sword of Saul did not return unsatisfied." Saul and Jonathan. In life they were loved and gracious, and in death they were not parted. They were swifter than eagles, they were stronger than lions. O daughters of Israel, weep for Saul, who clothed you in scarlet and finery, who adorned your garments with ornaments of gold. How the mighty have fallen in battle. Jonathan lies slain on your heights. I grieve for you, Jonathan, my brother. You were very dear to me. Your love for me was wonderful, more wonderful than that of women. How the mighty have fallen. The weapons of war have perished. This is the word of the Lord.
Thank you, Karen. And I think I'm going to give more than just one word. Is that all right? Okay, just a few. So we come to unpack this. We're continuing the series of the life of David, as Neil said, and it's all come about from some ABBA songs when somebody was sitting in an ABBA concert reflecting. Today's song is called "When All It's Said and Done," and we find today that it is said and done for David. But we're going to hear about the reaction of David to Saul's and Jonathan's death and looking at what we can learn from it. But first, a prayer. Heavenly Father, your word can sometimes be strange to us, but we can always find truth in it. We ask you now to open our hearts and minds to hear what you want to say to us. In Jesus' name, amen. Now, when I started reading this passage I've been given, I thought, well, it's not particularly appropriate for a baptism because it's all about death. But then we think about in baptism where somebody is put to death through the sin and they're cleansed and they're given new life. So there are things that we can learn about it. And when I started reading it, I realised I knew this passage. Why? Because in my youth, quite a long time ago now, I had to learn it for one of my guide badges, but it wasn't in this version. It was the King James Bible version, so that gives you an idea of how long ago it was. But as I started reading it, some of the verses came back to me. So I was really glad and comforted to know that I haven't completely lost all my marbles and memories yet. But the next thing that struck me was that I'd never preached on this particular passage before. I'd never heard a sermon on it, and I've never done a Bible study on it, and I don't know if you have either. So it's quite a strange and difficult passage, but hopefully as we go through it and listen to what I've been asked to say, we can learn some things from it that are particular to us. But first, there are people here who might not have been in the sermon series, so a quick recap. We've heard that Israel wanted a king like all the surrounding nations, a visible human king, not like the invisible God of Israel who'd served them up to now. Saul was anointed to be the first king of Israel. He started off okay, very good, listening to God, doing what God asked him. But then, as time went on, he disobeyed God's instructions and took on things for himself. So God, in his wisdom, took his anointing spirit away from Saul and gave it to David. Now, as I said, this passage is difficult. It's difficult to teach, it's difficult to understand, but let's look at it as a way of understanding the raw emotions of war, of death, but also of friendship and companionship. It's a classic example of male bonding and literature that is written about war, where the hero of the story suffers the loss of either a friend or a mentor. Now, you might not be a Star Wars fan, but my husband and all my family are. And so a modern example of losing a mentor or a hero is Luke Skywalker, when Obi-Wan Kenobi sacrificed himself on the Death Star. Obviously not many Star Wars fans here. Okay. Now, this might appeal to the ladies, because it certainly appeals to me. What about Top Gun, the movie? That was one of my favourites when I was a younger lass. And what about when Maverick, Tom Cruise, took his wingman in the plane, in the sky, and also in the nightclub, if you know the movie, took him in his arms when he died in a training accident? This is how we can mourn our friend. This is what happens, the emotions that come up when we lose someone very close and very dear to us. Now, David's mourning is national. We heard it when we heard that when he heard of Saul's death, David and all the men with him took hold of their clothes and tore them. He wrote this lament, this song for them, and told the Israelites to learn it so that they could remember it and remember what had been done for them by Saul and Jonathan. Now, David's lament in part mourns Saul's death because it caused the Philistines, the ones that had beaten the Israelites, to gloat over Israel's defeat, saying that their god Dagon was superior to the God of Israel. So David is mourning the loss of name, the loss of prestige to God. But David's mourning is also personal. Here we find that David has lost his mentor Saul and his best friend Jonathan. And he mourns them even though their relationships have become complicated. His mourning cry is raw, it's painful. But like the mourning of Luke and Maverick, as I've said, in his song, David recalls only the best details, the best things about those people, the best details about his friendship with both Saul and Jonathan. He avoids mentioning all the difficulties both he and Jonathan had suffered and endured at Saul's hand. David mourned when we who know the story might have expected him to celebrate the death of his great enemy and rival. Remember, Saul had took away David's family, his home, his life, his security, and the best years of David's life out of jealousy, hatred, spite, and ungodliness. And Saul went to his death utterly unrepentant. Yet David mourned and wept and fasted when he learned of Saul's death. Now, this contrast powerfully demonstrates that our hatred, our bitterness, our unforgiveness is something that we choose ourselves. It's not imposed on us. And as much as Saul did against David, trying to kill him and kill everything he knew and loved, David chose to become better instead of bitter. David chose to become better, not bitter. Although David himself had been anointed earlier on, he continually recognized Saul's anointing. Saul was the one God had anointed to be the king of Israel, and David recognized it throughout, refusing to kill him when he had several opportunities to do so. But now, at their death, David praises these two men who never retreated from Israel's enemies. We heard, the bow of Jonathan turned not back. The sword of Saul returned not empty. His lament goes on to praise the steadfastness of Jonathan. It praises the loyalty of Jonathan to his father, even though he didn't agree with him about his treatment of David. It praised the covenant friendship that Jonathan had with David. Jonathan's persistent loyalty and refusal to break their covenant friendship bond is praised. And in every trouble that David had, he knew he could count on Jonathan. It's great to have friends like that you can count on, isn't it? David's lament over Jonathan illustrates that powerful bond of friendship between the two men. Jonathan was a friend who sticks closer than a brother, even though there was a big difference in age and background. We see the same loyalty and bonding in maybe the special forces groups, such as SAS and SEALs teams. Perhaps we would do well to show that same kind of covenant loyalty to our friends and our community in Christ. Now, as Christians, or just generally, we're not very well schooled in lament. The Christian culture generally focuses on the joy of resurrection, as we'll be celebrating Jesus's in a few weeks at Easter. We tend to focus on the new life in the face of death, so much so that sometimes we may be reluctant to linger in grief or feel that we shouldn't be grieving. Today, for the Elliott family, it's a time of joy and gladness and celebration, and rightfully so. But we're told in Ecclesiastes 3 that there's a time for everything and a season for every activity under heaven. And the last 2 years have brought a lot of pain, sadness, loss and grief, which is continuing with the ongoing situation in Ukraine. But I want to focus on David's grief and its place in the life of faith. David intoned his lamentation. That means he sang it out. He sang it out loud and long. He didn't shy away from naming his loss in great detail. He'd lost loved ones. Israel had lost its strength and security. We have too. Woven throughout David's speech is the drumbeat, how the mighty have fallen. King Saul and his son Jonathan were the mighty ones, the ones in Israel upon whom God's people depended for security and strength. Now for us, we've lost our strength and security. Many have lost jobs, wages, careers, retirement savings. These have hit many people very hard. The rise in inflation and the pain caused by sanctions placed on Russia are being felt now. Many of our sources of security and strength have crumbled and are continuing to crumble. Israel's pattern of life have been stripped away by the loss of their king, replaced by the unknown and confusion. David and his band of the Israelites had lost their normal pattern and routine of life. We have too, and we're still trying to discover what our new normal is. Grief is so profound, so all-encompassing, and David reminds us that even mountains and fields bear witness to it. Death brings a new reality to him that shakes him to the core. How can the sun still rise when our loved ones are gone or our sense of normality is missing? These verses recognise that not only people but all creation shares in this interruption of life. Now, David's lament over Saul and Jonathan gives us, as we read it, an opportunity to pause and name our losses, but also to give thanks and praise those that we remember. Our losses could be people, could be relationships, could be support systems, community life. These are all the losses we and the world have suffered over the last 2 years and are continuing to suffer, for which we have the right to grieve. Only after fully plumbing the depths of grief can we realise another truth underlining this passage, that new life will emerge. Saul's death makes way for the next new season in Israel and David's life. This reality in no way lessens the loss. Yet it's important to squarely face the necessity of endings in order to have new beginnings. Saul's death opens the way for a time of turning for God's people, a time for Israel to turn back to the God who loves and guides them through his anointed one, who will be David. A new united kingdom will eventually flourish under David and his dynasty. This season for us may also be a time of reflection and perhaps turning to or back to God. So let's take a little time to reflect on what we've heard. Think about losses suffered, things that need to be praised, as David praised both Saul and Jonathan. And think of the new life that we will have in this new season. What has the Spirit brought to your mind as I've spoken? What do we need to grieve for? What do we need to give thanks for? How does God want us to proceed from here in the next season of our lives?